bit about what you are here for. You wrote a book. What's the name of the book?
I did. I wrote a book. It is entitled Memorial Star, the story of Edwin R. Woodriffe, the nation's first African-American FBI special agent killed in the line of duty.
So what made you decide to tell your father's story?
I think it needed to be told. It's not a Google search. Everybody knows that on January 8th, 1969, he and his partner, Anthony Palmisano, were gunned down. Everybody knows that part. But there was more to the man than just that day. And I wanted to let people in on it.
When was the moment that you said, I have to tell my father's story?
September 26, 1997. I was sitting in a chair at the building dedication in Washington, D.C., the FBI Washington field office. And as they were doing the dedication, I looked around and I said, you know what? I want to tell my father's story. But I was terrified of it, so I didn't do it then. I'm doing it now.
When did you begin writing the book?
The process of writing the book, maybe 3 years, with research and interviews with past agents that worked with my father, his supervisor, family members, friends, getting background information. That took the lion's share of my time. Pouring through thousands of pages of FOIA files on my father. That was an extensive file to go through. So that all had to be done to lay the groundwork for the actual writing. The writing portion of it, surprisingly, only took less than 6 months. The story's true, so I knew where it was going. It was just about crafting it the proper way. But it was mostly the research that took the longest part.
How was it emotionally for you having to write this book?
That's a hard question. I almost teared up on that one. That's a hard question. When I first started, I tried to remove myself. How I refer to myself in the book is not really how anybody refers to me now. So it made it easier for me to step outside myself and sit down to begin to write it. Whose point of view was I writing this story from? That kept me up for months before I wrote the first word. So there were a lot of things that I wrestled with that made it difficult initially. As the process went on, it seemed to get easier. I was on a roll. I was churning out thousands of words in a very short period of time. That lulled me into a false sense of security because the 2 chapters that caused me the most anguish was the chapter I wrote when my father was killed and the chapter I wrote when my mother found out. And I literally had tears falling onto the keyboard as I was typing. And I realized then that my brother and myself, we both suffered a tragedy when we were very young, 5 and 6 years old. Where does that trauma go? It has to go somewhere. And I never thought about that until I started writing this book 50 years later, that that's still locked in you. And so I opened up a Pandora's box writing this book. And what I realized in each chapter, and as I got deeper and deeper into it, that those emotions came to the surface and they flooded over. But ultimately, it was very cathartic that I purged all of that was in me out of my system. And now, on the other side, I can breathe easier, breathe deeper, and look at it in a different perspective without being just on the verge of tears when I talk about it. Now I can actually talk about it. So the process was difficult, but it was very rewarding in the end.
You say now you can talk about it without being on the verge of tears. So for you now, do you feel like you'll talk about your father more? Did you feel like you shied away from talking about him before?
I've always talked about my father. I've never been the one really to not talk about him. I think my brother was more private than I was in that respect. However, I only talked about the surface things, the things that people already knew. I didn't dive down into stories about either his upbringing or difficulties that he faced in training or just starting out in the bureau and things like that. I never got into the story. And so that's why I think that writing this novel was beneficial as well, to just get into all of those little stories that no one ever knew.
Okay, the last question for you by yourself is, what do you hope people get from the book, reading the book?
You know, I hope that they can see kind of a tale of hope and a tale of perseverance, a tenacity tale, if you will. I want people to know that in 1969, it wasn't easy. In 1969, there weren't a lot of agents of color. There still aren't a lot of agents of color, but there were even less then. There were certainly even less under J. Edgar Hoover. And so I want to transport people back to 1969 to know exactly how hard it was and what you had to go through to get to that level of being a special agent in the FBI. It wasn't easy. Everybody couldn't do it. He did. And I want the story to be told.